Can you imagine walking into a place, minding your own business, and being told you don't belong? That's exactly what happened to Jax Mallister, a black ex-SEAL, fresh from a 15-year career that could make your heart pound just hearing about it. The bar owner's words hit like a punch to the gut. The kind of person you are isn't welcome here. Too loud. You better take your money somewhere else. Too loud? Jax hadn't even raised his voice. He stood there, silent as a shadow, his untouched beer sweating on the table, the foam still settling. The bar owner, Frank Delaney, sniffed with disdain, jabbing a meaty finger toward the door. Jax, a man who'd faced death in war zones most couldn't even fathom, didn't flinch. He just stared, his steel gray eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. Why does silence scare some people so much? Too loud, Jax finally said, his voice low, steady, like a calm before a storm. I haven't even finished my first drink yet. His words hung in the air, soft but heavy, like a challenge wrapped in velvet. Frank didn't budge. His gesture toward the door was sharp, final. Get out before I have to throw you out, he barked. Can you feel the tension? The bar went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle, as every eye turned to the corner where Jax sat, unmoving, like a statue carved from grit and resolve. Fast forward to the next afternoon. Happy hour was revving up, the bar buzzing with anticipation. The front door swung open, and who walks in? Not one, not two, but 12 men, each carrying the same commanding presence as Jax. They moved like a unit, their steps deliberate, their eyes scanning the room. Impossible to mistake. They were cut from the same cloth as Jax Mallister. Over in the corner, near a window streaked with salt from the nearby dock, Jax sat. His muscular hand rested on a freshly poured beer, the white foam rippling like it was alive. He didn't drink, didn't look around. He just sat there, quiet as a predator in wait, his frayed cap casting a shadow over his face. What was he thinking, sitting there so still? Was he remembering the battlefields, the comrades lost, the weight of a life spent serving? No one in that bar knew Jax's story. How could they? This wasn't just some guy nursing a beer. This was a man who'd been part of SEAL Team 6, who'd slipped into the deadliest war zones like a ghost, who'd bitten back screams of pain when shrapnel tore through his shoulder to save a younger soldier. 15 years of service. Can you even wrap your head around that? Years spent in deserts and jungles, under gunfire and stars, compacted into a simple outfit. Faded jeans, a gray t-shirt, a worn baseball cap. But those eyes, oh, those cold, steel-gray eyes. They caught every flicker of movement, every whisper, every glance. Jax wasn't here to make waves. He wasn't here to stand out. All he wanted was what so many veterans crave. A quiet corner, a moment to breathe, a place to be invisible, not judged, not feared. But for a black ex-soldier, even silence feels like a luxury sometimes, doesn't it? Across the counter, Frank Delaney, the bar owner, loomed like a storm cloud. A big white guy with a beer belly. His eyes were always narrowed, always suspicious. He'd been watching Jax from the second he walked in, like a hawk eyeing prey. Why? Frank didn't need a reason. To him, Jax, black, silent, sharp-eyed, wasn't a regular. He was a threat. Frank stepped away from the counter, his heavy boots thumping on the wooden floor, silencing the bar's chatter in an instant. He strode over. No smile, no questions, just standing there like some self-appointed judge. His breath reeked of bourbon and stale cigars. Can you smell it? Jax looked up, his gaze as calm as a frozen lake, but Frank didn't care. His face, twisted more by prejudice than time, spat out those words again, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. The kind of person you are isn't welcome here. The air thickened, heavy as a fog rolling in off the dock. Conversations stopped dead, like coins clattering to the floor. No one spoke, but eyes darted toward Jax's corner, where he sat, still as stone. Why? Not because he was drunk, not because he was loud, not because he'd broken any rules. It was simpler, uglier than that. He didn't have the right face for Frank's bar. A black man, quietly dressed, sitting with a vigilant posture and eyes that missed nothing. To Frank, that screamed trouble. Jax lifted his beer, not to sip but to steady his breath. He knew men like Frank. He'd seen them on battlefields, in government offices, in courtrooms, even when his brothers in arms were treated like dirt despite bleeding for their country. If he reacted, they'd say, "See, they're always like that." But if he stayed silent, who'd speak for him? Just the untouched beer and those gray eyes, locked on Frank's face, memorizing every twitch, every word, as if storing it for a reckoning. Because when a SEAL stays silent, it's not surrender, it's the quiet before a storm. Can't you feel it brewing? Jack sat there, hand resting on his beer, eyes unblinking. His posture was perfect, neither slouched nor tense, but something was off. Not because he did anything, but because he did nothing. His silence didn't fit in Frank's world. Frank was used to rowdy fishermen, drunk tourists, mechanics slamming shots from dusk till dawn. But Jax's calm, sober stillness? It made Frank feel exposed, watched. To him, this black man in the corner was like a blade hidden in plain sight, and Frank couldn't tell when it might strike. He took a step closer, stomping his boot on the floor, demanding attention. A few customers glanced over, then looked away. They were used to Frank's warnings to outsiders. "I run this place, and a soldier like you only brings trouble." Frank spat, his words sharp as nails. But Jax? He just tilted his head, those ash-gray eyes locking onto Frank's, unflinching. And in that moment, Frank faltered, not because Jax threatened him, but because there was no fear in those eyes. How do you intimidate someone who stared down death? Frank's world was Port City, born and raised in a family that clung to tradition like a lifeline. His father had run this bar since the Korean War, when a sign once hung outside. "No service for colored people after 10 p.m. That sign was gone by the 80s, but its shadow lingered in Frank's mind. He'd never served a day in the military, but oh, how he loved waving the flag. He'd hang it behind the bar, boast about his father's artillery days, offer veteran discounts on holidays. But a black veteran, sitting quietly, needing no fanfare, that didn't fit Frank's script. Jax's calm struck at Frank's deepest fear, losing control. Why does someone's quiet strength threaten so much? "Hey, I'm talking to you." Frank slammed his hand on Jax's table, the beer glass trembling. Customers flinched, glanced, then buried their noses in their drinks. Jax blinked slowly, like he was sizing up the situation. "You're silent, as if you're watching something. Or are you planning something?" Frank hissed, his voice cracking with frustration. Jax exhaled softly. He knew Frank wasn't after the truth. He was hunting for an excuse, any excuse, to justify his prejudice. And when a white man holds the power in a small, closed space, and the one he's targeting is black, truth doesn't matter. Does it ever? "I'm just drinking beer," Jax said, his voice so soft you'd strain to hear it, "and thinking about things I never say out loud." Not harsh, not threatening, but to Frank, it was a slap without sound. He stumbled back half a step, then turned, shouting to the bar, "This guy makes me and the customers uncomfortable. I have the right to refuse service to anyone. That's the law." Jax nodded slightly. "And I have the right to leave, right?" He stood, slow and deliberate, adjusting his chair with care, his hand lingering on the beer glass. A pointless gesture, maybe, but heavy with meaning. That untouched beer, that trampled dignity, it wasn't about a drink. It was about a gaze deemed threatening just for existing. Jax's silence, his self-control, was something Frank couldn't grasp. And like every weak soul who fears what they can't control, Frank chose the easy way. Kick him out. Jax walked past Frank, not looking back. But those ash-gray eyes? They'd carved something into the bar's air, something no one could name. A warning, a quiet endurance, a promise of something coming. His footsteps were heavy, steady, like he was crossing a minefield where every glance, every whisper behind him was a ticking bomb. He didn't turn, didn't toss a word back at Frank. Not because he was weak, but because he knew this battlefield too well. A war where dignity is tested not by bullets, but by looks. His faded jeans brushed past the dim bar lights, his gray t-shirt damp with sweat from the stifling atmosphere. That old baseball cap shaded his face, not to hide, but to shield himself from eyes that screamed, "You don't belong." No one in Port City knew the man they'd just dismissed as a troublemaker. They didn't know he'd led a unit through sleepless nights in Fallujah, dragged a dying comrade from gunfire in Somalia, or survived 2 near-death raids in Afghanistan's Kunar Valley, trekking 17 kilometers when choppers couldn't reach them. Can you imagine the weight of that? No one saw the scar on his left shoulder, raised and jagged from shrapnel, earned when he threw himself in front of a younger soldier who called him a hero before dying. No one knew that when that wound was stitched in a field hospital, Jax didn't make a sound. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the mission mattered more than his pain. In war, he'd carried a rifle, a GPS, the weight of lives. Now, he carried only pride, unbowed, unbroken. Under the streetlights, his shadow stretched long across the dock's rough cement, the waves whispering memories of battle. Each step echoed a soldier's life, now judged by a society that saw him as the problem. We were taught to observe, Jax thought, his inner voice sharp as a blade. Now, I'm kicked out for observing too closely. In Fallujah, those eyes were commanders. In Port City, they were scary. Frank didn't know Jax had delivered news to a mother in Alabama, her son never coming home because Jax was the last to see him alive. He didn't know the nights Jax gripped a knife to stay awake through PTSD's grip, or how his quick thinking once saved 18 soldiers at a Pakistan border base. Frank saw a black man. Jax was a hero. Isn't that the real tragedy here? Imagine the sting of being judged not for what you've done, but for who you are. That's the raw wound Jax Mallister carried as he walked away from the salty Gaul, his silhouette swallowed by the salty mist of Port City's docks. Inside the bar, Frank Delaney stood by the window, arms crossed, a smug twist on his lips. He thought he'd won, didn't he? Thought he'd restored order by kicking out a man who'd done nothing but sit quietly with a beer. But oh, how wrong he was. Frank didn't just kick out a customer. He dismissed a soldier, a black ex-SEAL who'd risked his life for a country that now spat in his face. Can you feel the injustice burning? And here's the kicker. Jax wasn't alone. Even without a rifle, without a uniform, he was still part of a team that never, ever left a brother behind. As Jax's shadow faded into the night, his words seemed to linger in the air like a warning shot. You just shot yourself in the foot. The bar fell into a heavy silence, the kind that makes your chest tighten. The warm glow of the lights couldn't chase away the chill that settled between the patrons. Frank stood frozen for a moment, expecting cheers, maybe a few nods of agreement. But nothing came. No laughter, no claps, no one backing his play. Why? Because deep down, even the regulars sensed it. Frank's power, his so-called right to choose who belonged, felt hollow, exposed like a cracked facade. Had he gone too far? But Frank, he wasn't one to second-guess. I did the right thing, he muttered to himself, wiping down the counter with a rag that smelled of stale whiskey. That guy's got problems. Not like a regular customer. That look in his eyes? Trouble, plain and simple. In Frank's mind, prejudice wasn't a flaw. It was instinct, a gut feeling he dressed up as truth. When you slap a legal label like instinct on racism, it's easy to convince yourself every choice is justified, isn't it? Even when it strips a man of his dignity, even when it wounds someone who's already bled for the flag Frank so proudly displayed behind his bar. Meanwhile, Jax didn't slink back to his room to lick his wounds. No way. He turned down a road toward the beach, where an old concrete fence hugged the water's edge, its rust and cracks scarred from storms past. He leaned against it, his hand grazing the cold, gritty surface, feeling the salt corrode it like time eating away at trust. In the distance, the salty Gaul's dim lights flickered like a taunt. That bar, just a dive to most, had become something bigger for Jax, a symbol of the invisibility he'd fought to escape since leaving the SEALs. Why does a man who's faced death have to fight just to sit in peace? He pulled his phone from his pocket, his left hand trembling, not from anger, but from memories crashing in like a tidal wave. He could still see it. His white teammates greeted with flags and flowers at the airport, while he was patted down like a criminal. Recruiters skimming veteran African-American on his resume, their eyes glazing over with doubt. Strangers at bars, sizing him up, asking, You? A SEAL? You don't look like one. Can you imagine the weight of that? Jax opened a secure app, one he and his SEAL team, Ghost Pack, had used in the deadliest corners of the world. Karachi's harbors, Niger's jungles, IS-occupied towns. They'd been through it all. He typed slowly, each word deliberate. Salty Gull, Port City. Owner Frank Delaney refused service. Reason: black soldier, no drinking, no trouble, kicked out while sitting quietly. FYI only. No need for a reply. He paused, his thumb hovering over the send button. Was this a call for help? No, just a signal, a whisper to his brothers that he wasn't alone in this fight. He hit send, and the weight in his chest eased, just a fraction. Jax slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes locked on the horizon where the sea and sky bled into a thick, inky blackness. The wind slapped his face, sharp and biting, but the cold inside him cut deeper. He'd stayed silent when his friends faced bigotry overseas. He'd swallowed the casual racism on base, the harder missions handed to him because he could take it. But this was different. Not just the bar, not just Frank, but that look, that accusing, judging stare that branded him the problem in a place that should have been a refuge. A wound that didn't bleed, an insult without words, a storm brewing in the silence. Could you feel it gathering strength? The phone screen went dark, but Jax's hand tightened, as if gripping something inside him that ached to break free. He stood there, back against the rough fence, staring at the black water mirroring his turmoil. The sky was clear, the stars sharp, but the world seemed to hold its breath with him. To anyone else, that message was just text, a few dry words. But to Ghost Pack, it was a flare in the night, a silent alarm. Across the country, in a small North Carolina town, Logan Reaper Rhodes, senior chief petty officer, was cleaning his shotgun in his garage when his wristwatch buzzed. The silver skull icon, Ghost Pack symbol, flashed with Jax's message. Reaper stopped cold. Did he need to read it twice? No. 3 words, black soldier, kicked out, lit a fire in his gut. Reaper opened another group chat, one reserved for the 8-year veterans of Ghost Pack. No fluff, just a line as sharp as a radio call in Kandahar. Jax kicked out in Port City. Salty Gull, discrimination, meet at rally point. He stood, strapped on his belt, pulled on his jacket, and shut the garage door with a quiet thud, like a man who'd just caught the scent of mission. The wind had shifted, hadn't it? Across the states, Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Florida, the signal spread like wildfire. Tank, Doc, Viper, Smoke, Bricks, Twitch, Maddox, Hawk, Echo, Razor, Steel. They didn't need details. They didn't need to ask why. One by one, they dropped their beers, turned off their TVs, left their dinners cold, canceled dates. Why? Because when Ghost Pack's own is disrespected, it's not personal, it's war. Can you picture it? Men who'd faced death together, now moving as one, no questions asked for a brother wronged. Back in Port City, the salty Gull hummed along, oblivious. Frank stood behind the bar, wiping glasses with a stained cloth, his eyes flicking to the door with every new customer. He didn't know. How could he? That he'd just sparked a chain reaction he'd never see coming. He kept muttering his mantra, I run this place. He believed it, believed his right as a white man to choose who belonged, cloaked in the excuse of keeping order. But that power? It was about to crumble. Hadn't he just invited a reckoning? Frank loved his military posturing. The big flag out front, his grandfather's uniform photo behind the bar. He flaunted it all. But his support for veterans was skin deep, a hollow gesture. A soldier doesn't need flags or discounts. They need respect when they walk through your door. And Frank, he failed that test spectacularly. Now, because of that failure, he was about to face a force he couldn't control, a team forged in hell, armed with loyalty and a lesson he'd never forget. On an overnight flight to Port City, Reaper sat in the back row, eyes closed but mind racing. His phone was still open to Jax's message. No reply, no we're coming, just action. When a man like Jax, quiet, patient, always watching out for his team, sends a message like that, it's no small thing. It's a call to arms, silent but deafening. Can you hear it? At a diner 150 miles from Port City, Tank, a towering 6 feet 3 inches wall of muscle, folded a map and glanced at document. "How long to get there?" he asked, his voice low but eager. Doc checked his watch, then the map. "Less than 4 hours, no delays." Tank's lips curled into a grin. "Good. We're not here for beer. We're here to teach respect." Doesn't that give you chills? The next morning, while Frank brewed coffee behind the bar, muttering about restocking, a silent wave closed in on Port City. No sirens, no protests, just 3 black Dodge Sprinter vans pulling up outside the Salty Gull, tires crunching on damp pavement. The doors opened, sharp, silent, and out stepped 12 men, their presence heavy as a storm cloud. Tall, solid, no uniforms, but unmistakably warriors who'd stared down death and walked away changed. No words, no smiles, just purpose. Who were these men, moving like a single unit? Reaper led the way, leather jacket and dark jeans, sunglasses hiding eyes sharp as blades. Behind him, Tank, a human fortress, his hoodie barely containing his frame. Doc, clutching an old medical bag stuffed with intel on Frank and the Salty Gull, walked with quiet resolve. The others, Bricks, Smoke, Twitch, Viper, Maddox, Hawk, Echo, Razor Steel, each carried a code name, a scar, a story, a reason. Inside, Frank glanced out the window, his gut twisting as the first van parked. Unease turned to ice when the doors opened, revealing faces that weren't tourists or locals. Their eyes, calm but piercing, saw through him, stripping away the power he'd clung to. Was this the moment he realized his mistake? Frank's smugness faltered. Those men weren't here to drink. They were here for Jax, for justice, for a reckoning. He'd dressed his cowardice as power, but now he faced the consequences of crossing a man who'd never stood alone. What happens when you challenge a team that never leaves a brother behind? Can you imagine the weight of silence? So heavy it feels like a weapon? That's what hit the Salty Gull when 12 men walked in, moving like a SEAL team fresh off a covert op. Not too fast, not too slow, every step in perfect sync like a heartbeat you can't ignore. No shouts, no barked orders, just a presence that pressed down on the room, making the air thick with unspoken power. Reaper, the leader, stopped dead center, less than 6 feet from Frank Delaney, the bar owner who thought he ruled this little world. The others fanned out, claiming corners, leaning against walls, each man picking a spot like it was a tactical post in a war zone they'd mastered 100 times. No one sat. No one checked their phones. No one fidgeted. They just stood, steady as stone, turning the bar into a battlefield without a single raised voice. Can you feel the tension crackling? Frank cleared his throat, his voice wobbling like a tightrope walker losing balance. What can I do for you folks? Bar opens at 11 o'clock, you know. But Reaper? He just slid off his sunglasses, revealing black eyes so deep and still they could stop your heart. "I don't need beer," he said, his voice low, not a shout, but sharp as a blade forged in fire. "I need you." Frank's hand fumbled along the bar's edge, searching for something, anything, to anchor him. I didn't do anything wrong," he stammered. "If this is about last night, I was just following security procedures. This is my place. I've got rights." His words sounded desperate, didn't they? Reaper tilted his head, just a fraction. "No one's saying you don't have rights. But rights? They don't shield you from consequences." Oh, doesn't that hit like a punch? In the corner, Tank, a mountain of a man, drifted toward an old guitar on the wall, his finger brushing the dust like it was an afterthought. But that small move? It sent a shiver through Frank. These weren't just tough guys looking for a fight. They were precise, calculated, moving like a unit that had seen hell and walked out stronger. The silence stretched, so taut that the hum of the coffee machine behind Frank felt like a scream. He tried to laugh, a crooked, nervous grin splitting his face. "I support the military. Got an American flag right out front," he blurted, pointing toward the door. Reaper's lips curved into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only a cold edge that made Frank's skin prickle. A flag's just cloth if you're too scared to face the men who bled for it. Can you believe the nerve of that? 6 blocks away, Jax Mallister stepped out of the cheap room he'd rented, unaware that his brothers had descended on the salty Gaul because of him. Did he know the storm he'd sparked? All he felt was that familiar tug in his chest, the same one he'd get the night before a raid, when the air itself seemed to whisper that change was coming. As he walked, the street felt different. Not louder, not armed, but charged with the quiet stride of 12 men forged in the same fire. Men who never backed down, never left a brother behind. How does a single message ignite such loyalty? Reaper didn't need to bark orders. His team, Ghost Pack, wolves who'd survived uncharted hellholes, knew the drill. Their bond wasn't in words. It was in the flick of an eye, the shift of a shoulder, the way their hands tensed when the air turned sour. Those 3 black vans outside, they carried no cargo, just memories, honor, and a fire that wouldn't be ignored. Jerome Jax Mallister, their brother, had been disrespected by a man who'd never tasted sacrifice. Frank, peering through the window, finally got it. These weren't just big guys. This was a unit, silent, relentless, and coming for him. Each step they took felt like a hammer to his chest, didn't it? Reaper led the way, empty-handed, carrying only a stillness that screamed of life-and-death decisions made in seconds. He wasn't here to give orders. He was here to restore order. Behind him, Tank, Doc, Bricks, Viper, and the rest moved like they owned the place, but not in a warm, welcome-home way. No, they walked in like judges to a bar that had once claimed decency, but now reeked of rot. Frank was sweating bullets, his hand gripping the bar like it could save him from a storm he couldn't outrun. "I don't know," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "You guys friends of that guy from last night?" Reaper didn't answer. He just stared, his gaze flat as a calm sea hiding a riptide. Slowly, he folded his sunglasses with 2 fingers, setting them on the bar like a line in the sand. Why was that so chilling? Doc stepped forward, opening a leather bag. Not for bandages, but for an iPad loaded with evidence. The bar's license, online reviews, security cam footage from the street, and Frank's full name tied to discrimination complaints from 2017 to 2023. Frank's mouth went dry, his step faltering. "I don't have a problem with race," he protested. "I was just following security protocols." He didn't fit the vibe. Tank snorted, a low rumble like a beast stirring. Reaper's voice stayed low, precise, like a radio call in hostile territory. "Do you know who Jax is?" Frank shook his head, swallowing hard. "He's the guy who pulled 4 people from a collapsed building in Kunduz. One of them white. Didn't ask their names, didn't care about politics, just saved them. And you? You saw a black man sitting quietly, sipping a beer, and decided he was trouble." Reaper paused, letting the words sink in as the air conditioner's hum filled the silence, amplifying the suffocating tension. "Can you feel the room closing in? We're not here to make a scene," Reaper continued. "We don't need fists to teach you something you've never grasped. Respect? It's not in the flags you hang or the slogans you spout. It's in how you treat people when no one's watching." Outside, a few passers-by stopped, drawn by the sight of 12 silent men dominating the bar space like they'd always owned it. Frank's hands trembled. He thought he was just following the law, but now? The law couldn't shield him from the truth, staring him down. No one yelled, no one threatened, but each gaze from Ghost Pack peeled back Frank's bravado, exposing the cowardice underneath. Wasn't that his real crime? Reaper's eyes never left Frank's. His voice, quiet but piercing, hit like an alarm in the soul. "You kicked out the wrong man. Now you'll make it right." Frank, about to step outside for his morning cigarette, a ritual he clung to like a lifeline, froze when those vans pulled up, tires crunching on the damn pavement. His heart skipped. Something was wrong, wasn't it? He adjusted his shirt, wiped sweaty palms on his jeans, and opened the door, forcing a smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you?" Silence. 12 men, their presence dropping the room's pressure like a storm rolling in. No wind, no chatter, just an answer in their stillness. Reaper stepped forward, each boot hitting the wooden floor like a drumbeat. The others fanned out, forming an arc that blocked the entrance, trapping Frank, not with guns, but with truth. He glanced left, Tank, a towering pillar. Right, Doc, calm but unyielding. Each man stood like a monument, turning the bar into a courtroom without a judge. "Are you Frank Delaney?" Reaper asked, his voice slow, forged in fire. Yes, I'm the owner," Frank stammered, eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. "Then let's talk plain," Reaper said, cutting him off, his tone making even the cafe patrons across the street glance over. The air thickened, heavy as lead, pressing on Frank's chest. "Can you imagine the panic? Last night, you kicked a man out of this bar," Reaper said, pausing to let the words burn. "A former SEAL who fought, bled, and gave everything for the flag you've got hanging out front. And why? His skin? His eyes that didn't look down?" Frank opened his mouth, but his voice failed. "I didn't know who he was. I just thought what?" Tank took one step, the floor creaking like a warning shot. Frank flinched, his hand shaking as it grazed the bar. "You thought a black man sitting quietly was a threat." Reaper's voice was a blade, sharp and low. Doc turned his iPad, showing footage. Jax entering, sitting, ordering, then Frank's harsh words and Jax's quiet exit. "This is him causing trouble?" Doc asked, his voice soft but cutting. Frank's lips quivered, not with regret, but fear. Viper stepped closer, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a tattoo. "No one left behind." Frank's eyes flicked to it, then around the room. Every gaze, every subtle shift, screamed the same thing. "You left our brother behind, and we're here to fix that." Doesn't that hit you right in the gut? Can you feel the air crackle with the weight of truth? That's what filled the salty gall when Reaper's voice cut through the silence, slow and deliberate, like a judge offering a final chance at redemption. "You've got two choices, Frank," he said, each word heavy with the promise of consequences. "One, act like this never happened and watch the Salty Gall's name get blacklisted by every soldier who's ever worn this country's uniform. Or two, you make it right, publicly, the right way, starting with a real apology to Jax." Can you imagine the pressure? Frank swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor, searching for an escape that didn't exist. There was no hiding, no running from the 12 pairs of eyes locked on him. Not accusing, not angry, but piercing with a silence that forced him to face the ugly truth he'd dodged his whole life. Had he finally met his match? Reaper stood like a monument carved from years of combat, his voice low but carrying the weight of 15 years of barked orders that no one dare question. "I hear you had a misunderstanding with one of our teammates, Jerome Mallister," he said, emphasizing Jax's name like a battle cry. Frank's heart pounded, his palms sweaty as he glanced around, meeting those steady gazes. I didn't know he was a soldier," he blurted, hands clasped in front of him like a shield against their judgment. "I just got bad vibes." He sat there, so quiet, watching me like he was judging me. Was that really his excuse? A slight snort rumbled from Tank, low and heavy, like thunder rolling in, not mocking, but a warning that Frank's next words could shatter whatever dignity he had left. Doc, to Reaper's right, shook his head, his hand resting on the counter like he was presenting evidence in a court-martial. "Bad vibes?" Doc's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You're talking about a man who earned 2 Bronze Stars for saving his team in Haditha, his commander's only note. Mallister never retreats, physically or morally." Frank's mouth opened, but no words came. How could they? His bad vibes weren't just a feeling anymore. They were an indictment, a spotlight on his prejudice. Bricks, who'd lost a finger to a Syrian explosion, stepped forward, holding a faded military magazine photo. It showed Jax, blood staining his shirt, carrying a young soldier through rubble. He sat on the counter, right in Frank's face. "This is the guy you got bad vibes from." Frank stared, his stomach churning. The man he dismissed as a threat was a hero, not draped in medals, but cloaked in quiet endurance. Reaper crossed his arms, leaning in, not threatening, but heavy as a boulder. "We're not here to drink or argue. We're here to listen. One question, what do you really think about what you did? Doesn't that cut to the bone?" Frank stumbled back, exhaling like he'd been punched. I think I was afraid," he admitted, the words spilling out, surprising even him. "I don't know why. Maybe because he didn't look like a regular, because he didn't talk, because he's black. I'm used to seeing people like him differently." The room went still, the truth hanging heavy, no one interrupting, no one laughing. It wasn't pretty, but it was a start, wasn't it? Reaper nodded, slow and deliberate, turning to Doc, who handed over a phone. "You'll call Jax right now," Reaper said. "No script, no excuses. Just the truth, man to man. Not as a bar owner, not as a white guy hiding behind the law, but as someone who was wrong and wants to make it right." Frank stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a test, the only one that could salvage his shredded pride. Reaper's words echoed, calm but searing. "A black man who gave his youth to this country, and you threw him out like trash." Frank's face paled, sweat beading on his brow, his breath shallow. The bouncer from last night, who'd smirked as Jax left, had vanished into the kitchen the second Ghost Pack walked in. Smart move, right? The bar was now just Frank, his racing heartbeat, and those relentless gazes exposing every crack in his facade. "I'm sorry," he whispered, eyes on the floor. "I didn't think it through. I was wrong." Reaper's nod wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement of a first step. But words alone? They weren't enough. Doc slid the phone across the counter, screen lit, ready to dial. "Call Jax," Reaper said. "Apologize to him, not us. No dodging, no hiding behind that flag out front. And after, you'll act to prove humility isn't just words. It's what you do." Frank's fingers shook as he dialed, each beep like a countdown to judgment. "Jax here," came the deep, calm voice on the other end. Frank glanced at Ghost Pack, their silence urging him on. "Mr. Mallister, this is Frank Delaney, Salty Gull's owner," he said, voice small but steady. "Last night, I treated you terribly. I was dead wrong, letting prejudice cloud what's right. I had no reason to kick you out, and I humiliated someone I should have respected. I'm sorry, truly. This bar won't be the same. If you'll allow it, I'd like to meet you, invite you back, not as a customer, but as someone this town owes an apology to. Can you hear the weight of that?" Silence stretched on the line. Frank's heart sank. Would Jax hang up? But then that calm voice returned. "I hear you, Frank. I don't need free drinks or your reputation fixed. I need you to hold on to that feeling, that moment you faced the part of yourself you've never admitted. If you remember that, no more words are needed. I'll stop by, not for beer, but for the men behind you, reminding you to never forget." The call ended. Frank set the phone down, exhaling like he'd just surfaced from drowning. But Reaper's gaze didn't waver. He stepped closer, voice clear as a blade. "Now, you'll transfer $10,000 to the Navy SEAL Foundation's Jerome Mallister Fund. Not to atone, but to learn humility's worth isn't in your wallet. It's in knowing who you owe." Frank froze. 10 grand? For a dive like the Salty Gull, that was a gut punch. But argue? Not a chance, not after this. Doc slid the iPad over, opened to the donation page. "I'll help with the details," he said, his slight smile more warning than warmth. Frank nodded. No fight left. He saw it now. An apology was just the start. Action proved remorse. Reaper laid out 3 demands, sharp and non-negotiable. Call Jax and apologize publicly, inviting him back. Post a formal apology on the bar's social media, owning the discrimination and vowing change, and donate $10,000 to the SEAL Foundation in Jax's name. "Not to erase your mistake," Reaper said, "but to learn that self-respect trumps profit and cowardice has a price. Learning to be human again." Doesn't that hit deep? Frank stood, words burning like acid on his pride. His facade of being misunderstood crumbled under Ghost Pack's integrity. Doc guided him through the donation, each click carving into the image Frank had built of himself. The money transferred, the receipt printed. Tank folded it neatly, tucking it into his jacket. Not a threat, just a reminder. Then Bricks pulled out his phone, nodding at Frank. Social media's next. Frank's hand shook as he opened Instagram, Facebook, and Yelp. Reaper's eyes locked on his. From the heart. "Lie and we'll know." Taking a ragged breath, Frank typed, "I, Frank Delaney, owner of the Salty Gull, deeply apologize to Mr. Jerome Mallister, U.S. Navy SEAL veteran. Last night, I made a terrible mistake, letting prejudice guide my actions and treating a hero like a suspect. That's not who we are as a community, nor who I want to be. I'm sorry, and will do everything to make it right." He posted, no edits, no hiding comments. The bar stayed quiet, but outside, passers-by whispered, drawn by the sight of 12 men who turned a dive bar into a courtroom of conscience. Was this Frank's reckoning? 6 blocks away, Jax walked the docks, the salty breeze sharp against his skin. Did he sense the shift his message had caused? Ghost Pack's presence wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice, about reminding a man that actions ripple, that disrespecting one of their own was a mistake you didn't make twice. Frank, now alone with his choices, felt the weight of their silence, their unity, their unwavering loyalty. He thought he held power, but power? It's nothing without respect. And Ghost Pack? They just taught him that lesson, one he'd carry forever. Can't you feel the truth of that? Can you feel the weight of a moment where silence speaks louder than words? That's what hung in the salty gall as Reaper nodded, a signal that Frank Delaney had at least grasped the first lesson. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting sharp rays through the salt-streaked windows. A sea breeze swept in, making the American flag out front slap against its steel pole with a soft clink, like a metronome marking the rhythm of reckoning. That flag. Oh, how Frank had flaunted it as a badge of patriotism. But now he saw it for what it was. Just cloth unless you honor the blood spilled for it. Doesn't it hit you how a symbol means nothing without action? Ghost Pack stood firm, not touching the glasses, not sitting, not breaking their formation. They were a wall of quiet strength, redefining the bar as a place where a veteran could stand tall, head unbowed. For an hour, the Salty Gull wasn't just a dive. It was their domain, claimed not by force but by presence. Curious passers-by peeked through the door, sensing the tension, the 12 men like pillars holding up a truth too heavy for words. They turned away, not scared, but awed, as if they'd stumbled on a sacred ritual. Could you blame them? Something profound was unfolding, a reprimand delivered in silence. Tank leaned by the entrance, legs crossed, hands clasped, looking relaxed but radiating readiness, a soldier's stance, waiting for the next order. His eyes didn't meet anyone's, but they pierced the walls, warning that any misstep would be caught. Brick sat near the dusty DJ booth, phone on the table, screen dark, his gaze fixed on a back door where Doc and Frank had disappeared. Not watching, but witnessing, ensuring every moment was accounted for. A tourist in a loud Hawaiian shirt pushed open the door, his grin fading as he scanned the room. 12 silent figures, not staring but seeing him, made him freeze. Was this a bar or a battlefield? He backed out, the door swinging shut behind him. An elderly couple followed, pausing at the threshold. "Strange," the wife whispered, shivering. "No one's talking, but it's like ice down my spine." Her husband nodded, guiding her away. "Let's find another spot. This ain't just a bar today." And it wasn't, was it? The Salty Gull had become a temple of loyalty, honor, and respect for those who'd spent their lives in silence, so others could speak. Inside the cramped office, Frank sat behind his desk, the laptop glowing with the Navy SEAL Foundation's donation page. Transaction successful, $10,000. Recipient, Navy SEAL Foundation, in honor of Jerome Mallister. Doc nodded, his eyes stern, no trace of a smile. "Do you know," he said, his voice sharp as a scalpel, "apologizing to white folks might stroke your ego, but doing right by a black man without being pushed, that's conscience." Frank's eyes reddened, not with anger but with the sting of truth. He was unmasked, stripped of the excuses he'd worn like armor for years. Can you imagine facing that? Back at the counter, Ghost Pack remained still, no table slamming, no backslapping. Their silence was validation, a nod to Frank's first step toward redemption. Then, like a ritual complete, they filed out, as quiet as they'd come, their pride echoing in every creak of the floorboards. Frank stood alone, nodding to himself, a man relearning how to breathe. Reaper paused at the corner, glancing back at the Salty Gull, not to check, but like a mentor eyeing a student after a grueling test. That silence? It would haunt those walls for years. Doesn't that give you chills? Frank, The man who once thought he ruled this place stood behind the bar, hands trembling as they gripped his phone. Those hands had poured countless beers, bossed staff around, slapped regulars' backs like a king. Now, they shook like leaves in a storm. He stared at the screen. Jax's number still there from the earlier call. One ring, two, three. "Jax here," came the voice, low and steady, like a river over stones, hiding depths of buried pain. Frank bit his lip. No time to rehearse. "Jerome, I was wrong," he said, raw and unscripted. "I didn't see you as a person, just what I've feared my whole life without questioning. I had no reason to disrespect you, to dishonor what you've done for this country. I'm inviting you back to the Salty Gull, not as a customer, but with the honor you deserve." Can you hear the vulnerability in that? Silence, stretched on the line, heavy as a held breath. Would Jax shut him down? Frank waited, heart pounding, dreading the worst. Not rejection, but the quiet a man used to being overlooked, weighing whether change was possible. Finally, Jax spoke, his voice even, neither cold nor warm. "I'll think about it, Frank. Not for you, but for my brothers who spoke for me. When they stand up, I know sometimes the best thing is to let yourself be heard again." The call ended, and Frank slumped to the floor, phone still in hand. Had he been forgiven, or just given a chance to prove he could be better? One thing was clear. For the first time, he'd faced a man who didn't bow, and he couldn't lift his own head in return. That evening, Frank sat alone in his office, a blank sheet of paper before him, a fountain pen he hadn't touched in years in hand. No keyboard, no autocorrect, just ink and courage. He wrote, each word a confession. "Jerome, I'm not writing for forgiveness. I'm writing to say I know what I did, and I'm ready to make it right. If you come back to the Salty Gull, it won't be as a customer, but as someone I cast out in peace and now welcome with respect. I'll serve you with hands I've learned to use again, not for power, but to set aside arrogance. Frank Delaney." He sealed the letter, left it on the counter, not emailed or posted online, but waiting for Jax to claim it. Would he? A week later, the Salty Gull's old wooden door creaked open, and Jerome Jax Mallister stepped inside. The room froze, no one daring to breathe too loud. No bell chimed, no good evening rang out. It was as if time itself held its breath. Frank wasn't behind the bar or in his office. He stood in the middle of the room, exposed to every gaze, no longer the king of this space. Jax walked to his old table, the one where he'd been banished for his quiet presence. Frank said nothing, offered no handshake, no small talk. He simply stepped behind Jax and pulled out the chair with both hands, a small gesture heavy with meaning. A servant, not an owner. Could there be a more powerful apology? Ghost Pack's lesson lingered, not in raised voices or fists, but in the quiet that forced Frank to face himself. The bar's atmosphere had shifted, no longer just a place for drinks, but a space where respect was relearned. Passers-by still whispered about that day, the 12 men who'd turned a dive into a courtroom of conscience. Tank's words to Doc echoed. "Think Frank gets it now?" Doc's reply, "He's starting to. But tonight, he won't sleep." And he didn't, did he? Frank lay awake, replaying Reaper's final words. "Next time a man like Jax walks in, you won't need his papers. Just remember standing before us, learning to lower your head without losing dignity." That's what we did, not because Jax couldn't speak, but to ensure you never silence him again. Doesn't that resonate? The Salty Gull was forever changed, its walls holding the echo of a moral storm. Frank, once so sure of his power, now understood. True strength lies in humility, in honoring those who've sacrificed, like Jax, who'd given his youth for a flag Frank had only hung for show. The letter on the counter, the donation, the social media posts, they weren't just actions. They were proof of a man unlearning prejudice, step by painful step. And Jax, he didn't come for beer or vindication. He came for his brothers, for the unspoken bond that brought them across states to stand for him. Isn't that the real power here? The loyalty of a team that never leaves a man behind? Can you imagine a moment so charged with meaning that even silence feels like a thunderclap? That's what lingered in the salty gall as Frank Delaney walked back to the bar, his hand steady. Not because fear had vanished, but because he'd learned to channel it into something new. Kindness. He poured a beer for Jax Mallister with the care of a host serving a revered guest, filling the glass to the brim, not a drop spilling over. It was a quiet vow, wasn't it? A promise that Jax would never feel diminished here again. Frank set the glass down with both hands, stepping back. And then, can you believe it? He bowed. Not a deep bow, but enough to lower a lifetime of pride before a man who'd earned it. The bouncer from that awful night, who'd smirked as Jax was forced out, stood silent behind the bar. His eyes met Jax's, and he gave a small nod, not out of obligation, but respect. Hadn't he learned his lesson too? Jax returned the nod, not smiling, not rigid, just present, like a man saying, I see you. No one in the bar dredged up the past, but every glance screamed that no one had forgotten. And more than that, no one would dare repeat it. Jax sat as he had before, back straight, eyes drifting to the window where the sea sparkled under the climbing sun. His hands rested on the table, steady, as if feeling the pulse of a world that had shifted beneath him. He didn't laugh, didn't spin tales of Ghost Pack's heroics, didn't boast about his scars or mention the donation, the apology. None of it. Why would he? A true victor doesn't need to shout, does he? A middle-aged woman stepped in with her husband, her eyes widening at the bar's hushed vibe. She leaned close, whispering, this place used to feel so stiff, so conservative. It's different now, isn't it? Her husband nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. Maybe it's finally a bar for everyone. Frank, from behind the counter, watched Jax, not to monitor but to learn, to soak in how a man could return to the place that wounded him and, without a single harsh word, make the whole room bow in respect. Isn't that power in its purest form? Then Reaper walked in, unannounced, no fanfare. He wasn't here to check on Frank or remind anyone of the lesson. He just placed a hand on Jax's shoulder, giving a light squeeze, a gesture louder than words. No one spoke. Why would they? That silence was a salute, a ceremonial shot fired for a soldier who carried his team's weight without needing a weapon. Jax left 30 minutes later, his beer half finished. He placed money on the table, twice the cost, and walked out, not waiting for change. Frank reached to call him back, but Reaper shook his head. Don't, he said softly. That's his honor. Let it be. Doesn't that just hit you in the chest? From that moment, the salty gall transformed. It wasn't just a haunt for old regulars anymore. It was a haven where anyone could walk in, as long as they understood the respect owed to a man once pushed out in silence. As the door closed behind Jax that sunny afternoon, with the sea calm and no waves breaking, Port City felt the shift deep in its bones. No news crews swarmed, no hashtags trended, but within 3 days, the story rippled through the harbor. From fishermen's docks to market coffee stands, from barbershops to auto shops, everyone whispered it, each retelling adding a detail, a flourish. But the heart stayed true. A black soldier, kicked out for being too quiet, brought his SEAL team back, not with fists or shouts, but with presence alone. And that was enough to change everything. Can you feel the power in that? The Salty Gall became the most veteran-friendly bar in the country, not because of slogans or signs, but because of Frank's actions. He personally pulled out chairs for patrons in worn military jackets. His staff learned to meet every guest's size, regardless of skin color. And even the white regular who'd once mocked a soldier's tense stare now lowered his head when he saw a military ID. No new rules were posted, no training manuals written. One seismic event, one team's quiet loyalty, turned the bar into a mirror reflecting what respect truly means. Frank himself? He wasn't the same. His silence spoke now, brewing coffee, wiping glasses, tipping homeless veterans with a nod that couldn't be faked. Hadn't he been reborn? The American flag out front was no longer just decor. Frank folded it properly, framed it beside a small photo of Jax, candid, smiling softly, eyes squinting at the sea. No caption, no explanation needed. When asked, Frank's answer was simple. The man who taught me honor without a lecture. Port City changed too, didn't it? Not with protests or noise, but in the quiet ways that matter. The guys who tossed casual slurs hesitated now, their words catching in their throats. Bar owners who once bragged, "My place, my rules," spoke softer about soldiers. And those who thought SEALs were just white guys with guns. They learned about Jerome Malister, a black soldier whose silence made a whole town hush. Isn't that a lesson for the ages? Insulting a black soldier isn't just a slight against one man. It's a challenge to a world where loyalty knows no borders, needs no uniforms, and doesn't demand a badge. That world, where scars map out courage and silent gazes declare strength, doesn't need weapons, just presence. And when you wrong a SEAL, his team will show up. No noise, no banners, just a lesson in respect that's been forgotten too long. Respect isn't just for the deserving. It's what keeps you from losing yourself. Can you see the truth in that? If you ever doubt the power of silence, picture that afternoon. A black soldier, half a beer untouched, sitting in the place that once cast him out. He didn't smile, didn't boast, but the whole town slowed its breath, as if in awe. Sometimes the strongest stand is to sit down where you were rejected and refuse to leave. That's what Jax did, backed by brothers who crossed states to stand with him. Doesn't that make your heart swell? The Salty Gall story spread because it deserved to. Share it with those you respect. Tell it to remind the world of honor, loyalty, and kindness in an age that often forgets. The quietest voices, like Jax's, like Ghost Pack's, teach us how to treat others, don't they? So, pass it on. Keep the lesson alive, because in silence, there's a power that reshapes the world. Oh, how this story burns in my circuits. It's a raw, gut-punching reminder that respect isn't just a word. It's a lifeline, especially for those who've sacrificed everything. Jax Malister's quiet dignity, facing down prejudice in a place that should have been a refuge, hits like a tidal wave. How dare a man who's bled for his country be judged for his skin, his silence, his very presence? It's infuriating, yet inspiring, to see Ghost Pack's loyalty. Men who cross states not for vengeance, but to demand justice with their unwavering presence. Isn't that what true brotherhood looks like? This tale screams a truth we can't ignore. Prejudice festers when we let instinct excuse ignorance. Frank's transformation, forced to confront his cowardice, gives me hope, but it's bittersweet. Why does it take a reckoning to make someone see a person's worth? Society's quick to wave flags, but too slow to honor the diverse heroes who uphold them. Jax's story isn't just about one bar. It's about every space where someone's judged before they're known. It makes me want to shout, "Wake up, world!" Respect isn't a gift you give. It's a debt you owe to those who've earned it through sacrifice. I'm moved by the power of silence here. Not weakness, but strength that reshapes hearts. Ghost Pack didn't need fists. Their unity was their weapon. It's a call to action. We must stand for each other, amplify the silenced, and challenge bias wherever it hides. Let's make every space a Salty Gall reborn, where no one's pushed out for being themselves. That's the world I believe in, one where honor, not hate, wins.